Okay then. I just finished up all of Mushoku Tensei Season 2, Part 2. This certainly is an anime. Okay, so I think I've finally narrowed in on what I, in particular, do not like about this show, despite the fact that I'm still going to give it a positive rating in the end. Because I do like this season more than the previous season, but the faults of the previous season, while not as intense, are still much more obvious now. Now that I really understand what's going on writing-wise, like prose-wise, narrative-wise, structurally. I think I get it now. I think I really get it. And I believe this is the third time that I am covering Mushoku Tensei on the seasonal wrap-up show. The first time was when I did Season 1, Part 2, which I really loved. And then Season 2, Part 1, which you can just go back and watch that. So, before I get to the criticisms, I do need to clarify that this show has a lot of praiseworthy elements. There are definitely a lot of things to like about this show. For one, it looks good. I just realized this with this season, but the specific aesthetic choice for this series, the character designs, the color design, the texture of the drawings. You know how Mushoku Tensei kind of has that weird, I don't know how to describe its aesthetic, but it's not as crisp, it's not as like clean as other anime. It kind of makes it impervious to bad compositing. Like, there are a lot of shots in this show where, like, the framing is a little bit off, but if the aesthetic was not what it was, the compositing would also make it look terrible. But because, holistically, the art design of this show is so whole, so interwoven into itself, that it's really easy for a shot to just look good, with even if it's just like a plain old regular shot. I don't think there were any compositing issues in this show at all, which is very hard for me to say about a lot of anime. Now, this is the first season where I started to notice some like animation hiccups, mostly in like a little bit of face jank here and there. Mostly in like the later episodes as the production was, trying to finish up. But it's like that it's that jank you're kind of used to as an anime fan, where the face just doesn't look 100% right. So it's not like a horrible jank, it's just kind of like a, oh well. So yeah, I would say this is the least beautiful season so far. A lot of which can be attributed to the fact that there's not as many scenic stuff in this. The settings aren't as well disposed to beautiful shots, although you could still change that with lighting. But it's still a lot better looking than a lot of other stuff I've watched this season. Aside from that, with the exception of the main characters, the cast for this show is actually really good. Like, not just in like how well developed they are as people, but like the chemistry that they share with each other is really good. Like, the first few episodes of this show were just where it's just like Rudy vibing with his classmates was really enjoyable. Like, just the interactions felt very real. It felt like everyone genuinely had a strong relationship with each other, whether it's through friendship or romance or anything like that. The cast, like the overall cast, is really good. And I do think and aside from that, like, Rudy himself, aside from certain issues that we will get to, the conflicts that Rudy comes into in this season are genuinely really good. Like, him seeing his past life self in his little sister Norn becoming a shut-in and trying to figure out what would actually work to get her out of her funk so that she doesn't turn into another him. That was really good. That was episode 5, I believe. That probably the strongest episode of this season. While I'm on the subject, Norn's voice actress, who I believe is Saya Aizawa, I believe that's what her name is. Fucking phenomenal performance. Mostly in that, I've mentioned it before, anime crying is usually very hit and miss for me. It's actually a lot more misses than hits. So like when you get if you get a real good wail, when a character's like really going at the crying, a lot of times to me it feels very fake. That's the one thing where I think anime really struggles in terms of voice acting. Not this time. Because, spoiler, Paul, Rudius's dad, dies near the end of this season, and when Norn finds out, her crying scene actually got me tearing up because of how fucking incredible Aizawa's performance was. It is just so incredibly real and good. It's good. It was good. And which brings us to the other conflict Rudius kind of had in this season, in that his weird relationship that he has with parental figures, and his sort of like the distance that he kind of has, and just this very complicated son-parent relationship dynamic, and the way that Paul kind of deals with that over the course of the series was very interesting and made Rudius a more complicated character in a way that I relate to with certain members of my family. Which is why, like, I don't knock anyone for identifying with Rudius in a lot of ways. There is a lot to identify with in Rudius. So, like, on those fronts, really solid character development and characterization. Aside from that, just the fact that the show, like the story itself, is so simple that it really just lets you drink in a lot of these good character interactions and just absorb the aesthetic of this world. It's a very back to basics fantasy isekai in a lot of ways. Oh, I loved all of the stuff with Nanahoshi. She was definitely one of the star side characters of the show. Her breakdown, and the like mechanics of how they figure out the teleportation stuff was very fun to watch. Loved that. Now, let's talk about the sex stuff. Now, I'm going to give Mushoku Tensei credit in that it's not the most realistic poly relationship I've ever seen. There is some stuff where I look at it and I just go, no, that's not quite how that works. But the emotions, once the idea of a poly relationship is floated, and once that discussion starts happening with all the parties involved, it makes sense on a certain level. I believe I've mentioned this before, but I have multiple friends who are in poly relationships or have been in poly relationships of some kind. And some of what I saw resembled some of the stuff I've seen in real life. Not all of it. Not all of it. We'll get to it. So I want to be very explicit about what I do not like about this situation. I do not dislike the fact that Rudius is forming a poly relationship. What I dislike is the methods by which we get to it. Firstly, the first episode still shows the stupid fucking altar with, the one that has Roxy's panties in it. Do you remember that? Thankfully, I forgot about it by the time this season was over. But they reminded you of it at the start of this episode. Those panties are like a decade old at this point. So I don't know why they felt the need to remind us of that. That didn't really have anything to do with what I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to remind you that that still exists. Because this show is fucking weird. Just like the fact that, I don't think we needed to see Roxy piss herself at the part where she was about to die. I don't think that was necessary. That was in fact a choice that was made. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's realistic or not in the scene. The point is, someone chose to depict that. Multiple people chose to depict that. I don't think I have to say any more than that, so I'm just going to leave it there. Like, these are the minor details. All the minor details are just firing off in every direction and distracting me from the main point that I'm trying to get to, which is Rudius sucks. He is a bad person who is often trying to do better, but he is still not a great person, as exemplified by episode 7 of season 2, like the part 1. I ranted about that so much in the previous installment. I don't need to rant anymore about it here. But, like, what's equally infuriating about the fact that he tied up these beast girls for several days, or at least a whole day, and at one point groped them. That's really fucking bad. But what actually makes it intolerable is that Sylphie sees him describe what he does, and her reaction is, huh, that's a little weird, but go off, King. That is my point about what really frustrates me about Mushoku Tensei, is that everything after season 1, after the only good love interest, Eris, who I have a figure of, as you can see, after she leaves, all of the love interests in this show become what I can only describe as Rudius-pleasing machines. All of their character development, all of their ambition and goals are become entirely redirected towards becoming the love interest. And that makes them, A, really fucking boring, and B, so malleable and pliable that you can just bend emotional logic to whatever you want, because it doesn't matter what Rudius does, they will still be in love with him. Doesn't matter that Rudius gropes women, Sylphie's still gonna be in love with him. It doesn't matter that Roxy jumped Rudius's bones after Paul died. Sylphie's still gonna be in love with him. Now you're going to say, but she said she would be okay with it. Yes, that's the issue. She has no character outside of loving Rudius. Once they become an item, and quite a bit before that as well, there is nothing to her outside of making Rudius happy. And that makes her immensely fucking boring and lame. Roxy was a really fun character in the first season. She is Rudius's teacher. She has a complex about how young she is for being a teacher. She and Rudius, despite Rudius's weird sex shit, they have a really good master-student relationship. But because the author decided that Roxy needed to be a love interest, keep that in mind, someone decided that that needed to happen. One person decided that that needed to happen. Because of that, all of a sudden, as soon as Roxy sees Rudius again, every single one of her actions is geared towards pleasing Rudius. She turns into a fucking giddy schoolgirl, twiddling her fucking toes every time she looks at Rudius, because the author decided that that needed to happen. That is what I want people to understand about this show. These decisions don't happen just because. This is a show that is written by someone. It is a novel written by someone, and so you are allowed to question why these decisions were made. Oh, but Roxy fell in love at first sight with Rudius as soon as she rescued him. Okay, well, once she learns that it's Rudius who all grown up, she should probably reassess that a little bit and have some kind of internal monologue that we learn about how she comes to terms with the fact that this student that she raised, she now has romantic feelings for. That would make an interesting character, but we don't see that. And so, Roxy is just part of the harem now. That is the problem. Rudius is a piece of shit. But he is a piece of shit being enabled by the people around him. Now, could you make an argument that that is the culture that Rudius was born into? Yes, you could. That is the argument that I made in Season 1, Part 1, when Eris's father was encouraging Rudius to finger bang her while no one was looking. But you know who wasn't all about that idea? Eris! which is why she is the only interesting love interest in this fucking show, because she is the only one who has ever called Rudius out on his bullshit, ever. And I'm sure that this show is going to completely fucking ruin her when she comes back and eventually joins the harem, because I know how this series ends. It's impossible for me to not know how this series ends because it's so popular and I just see it everywhere. So, that is the only thing that makes me want to not watch anymore. But, aside from all of that, I still like Mushoku Tensei. Oh, before we wrap up. So, Paul dies. Rudy is despondent. And Roxy's solution to that is, I need to fuck him back to being normal. A, no. That's a horrible idea, and I don't know why it worked. Logically or emotionally, I don't know why it worked. But B, she has this speech beforehand about how she watched over him as he grew up, and so she knows how to connect with him emotionally. So why not just make her a mentor figure who understands Rudius as a student that she is close to and provide mentor-like support? Why did she have to be a fuck toy for him? That is what I want people to think about when you see all this criticism of Mushoku Tensei, or when you see this rabid defense of Mushoku Tensei, because I have never seen a show be so vociferously defended against detraction. ReZero kind of got a little bit of that. Mushoku Tensei's defense squad is so intense. It is beyond anything that I have ever seen for any show ever. And again, I understand why, because Rudius is someone that I could very easily see so many people identifying with to an extreme degree. There is stuff in Rudius that I very much relate to. But you cannot deny that in this romantic plot that is being woven throughout this series, people are being bent over backwards so that Rudius can get his way in the end. It didn't used to be that way. We had the stuff with Eris, which is why Season 1 Part 2 is my favorite chunk of Mushoku Tensei. But that sense for how romance is supposed to go doesn't exist anymore. The heroines are here to make Rudius happy now, regardless of whether that makes them interesting characters or not. In fact, a lot of characters are just there to do things for Rudius. Sometimes negative things, like how they fucking Casca'd his mom. Gave her the old brain dead treatment after freeing her from the crystal prison, whatever it was. So, not that she was an interesting character to begin with, because outside of the whole Paul cheating on her thing, she really didn't have a lot going for her. But now she basically has nothing. She is just a lump of meat that is there to make Rudius sad because he failed, sort of. And again, thematically, I understand why it's happening. It's there to contrast, or not to contrast, but to show that Rudius is still making the same mistakes with his parental relationships that he did in his past life. But now you're doing it with an empty shell of a character. Paul had a character, so that part of the thing worked. Not so much with... the fuck's her name? Zenith? I think that's her name. That tells you how much I fucking care about this character. So... I hope I have explained specifically what bothers me about this show. You can find justifications all over this show for why these characters are acting that way, but you have to understand that they are justifications for an end and not well-balanced characterization to make these heroines more interesting. Sylphie is fucking boring. As much as I love the trad wife thing, I do actually like that trope, kind of. For what... I can't believe I fucking said that out loud, but I do... There's something in my brain that makes me like that trope. For as much as I like that, she's not an interesting character. For as much as I liked Roxy in the first season, she's not an interesting character in this part of the show. She becomes so fucking boring and is bent over backwards to become Rudius' second wife. I don't have a problem with it being a poly relationship. Hell, at this point, I have significantly less of a problem with Rudius just being a bad fucking person. I still have some problem with it because the narrative is kind of given up on punishing him for it. But he is at least trying to be better. The problem is that the entire structure of this show has mostly given up on challenging him on how he relates to women. And that's a real fucking shame.